Hello everyone! You've already seen two games on my channel between Morphy and Anderssen, and well, one was the casual game they played, one was from their official match in 1858. Morphy won both of those games, but just so you don't think that Morphy won all the games, Anderssen did win two games from their match, and this is a game from round number 10. This is, well, one round after the game from the previous video, that game Morphy won in the Sicilian defense. And Anderssen decided to change the approach to this match, although it was pretty much too late. He was already lost, but he wanted to give Morphy a real taste of the German mastery, and he decided to play pawn to a3 on the first move. So not really going for any tactical melees against Morphy this time. We had e5, c4, knight to f6, knight to c3. And the d5. C captures on d5, knight captures on d5, and e3. So it's like Mr. Anderssen decided to play the Sicilian, but only with the white pieces, with the colors reversed, and with this extra move of the pawn. So bishop to e6, knight to f3, bishop to d6, and bishop to e2, preparing to castle. Morphy castles, Anderssen castles, and we have knight captures on c3. B captures on c3, f5 and e4. Morphy pushes e4, and we have knight to d2, kind of locking Anderssen's pieces in, but this will all be fixed very soon. Rook to f6, Morphy does a rook lift, preparing for rook to g6 or h6, well, depending on what Anderssen plays, and Anderssen goes for f4. Now closing this dark squared bishop of Morphy's on d6. And well, although Morphy would like this bishop to be free, playing a move like e captures on f3 wouldn't really be that good for black. For example, knight captures on f3, and now all of Anderssen's pieces are completely free to develop. He can play queen c2, bishop d3, push e4, and well, this is played by itself. So after f4, Morphy decided to go for rook to h6, preparing queen to h4, going for a kingside attack. G3, Anderssen stops this. We have knight to d7 and knight to c4. Not really planning to grab this bishop on d6, as it's not really doing anything. The idea is knight to e5, placing the knight to a very nice central square. So instead of allowing this, Morphy decided to trade in his light square bishop for the knight. The bishop captures on c4. Bishop captures on c4 now with check, and we have king to h8. Rook to a2, Anderssen does a mini rook lift to protect his pawn on h2 from any future attacks by Morphy. Queen to e7, preparing to bring the other rook into the game. Now a4. We have knight to f6, queen to b3, attacking the b7 pawn. Now c6, and bishop to e6. Now, well, it's a pretty annoying bishop there. I'll give Mr. Anderssen that. But rook to e8, and Morphy forces the bishop to go back. So bishop to c4 and knight to g4. Morphy is, well, really trying to make something happen here. But it's really hard. The queen can't really get anywhere in there. Maybe if the rook wasn't on e8, then maybe queen to e8 and queen to h5 would be possible. But well, this rook on a2 is doing a pretty good job protecting the second rank. So rook to g2 by Anderssen. We have rook to b8, now preparing to push the b pawn. Bishop to e2, now attacking the knight. Knight goes back to f6, and we have c4. b6 by Morphy, bishop to b2, now lining up the bishop to this very strong diagonal as the king is on h8. Queen to f7, we have queen to c2, as well, now while the queen is here, you can't really push c5 as the queen would be hanging here. So after queen to c2, we have bishop to e7, now bishop to c3, rook back to g8, and we have a5. Anderssen wants to break this queenside pawn majority Morphy has here. Bishop to d6, now a captures on b6, a captures on b6, and now rook to a1. Anderssen wins this very nice a file for his rook. And well, this is, well, kind of the critical position of the game, as the position is about equal. Anderssen is controlling a bit more space, And with a move like, for example, rook to c8 or rook to b8, this would, well, still be anyone's game. But Morphy probably got tired of this positional piece pushing, and he decided to go for the attack and played g5. And it's a very bold move, but, well, you're really opening your king up to this bishop on c3. After a move like c5 or d5 is played, this will be very hard to hold for Morphy. F captures on g5 by Anderssen, rook captures on g5, and we have rook to a8 check. Anderssen plays this rook to a8 check, actually with the idea of exchanging queens, not allowing Morphy to create any sort of an attack. Rook to g8, queen to a4, now protecting the rook on a8 and also attacking the c6 pawn. Rook captures on a8, queen captures on a8 with check, and also with an attack on the c6 pawn. And the Morphy has to play queen to e8, now defending check and also protecting the c6 pawn. And Anderssen exchanges queens. Queen captures, knight captures, and now c5. And this was pretty much the entire idea that refuted Morphy's g5 move. Forcing the exchange of queens, and after that happened, this c5 move, as now Morphy cannot capture this pawn. If c captures, then d captures on c5. Opening up a discovered check and winning this bishop on d6. So after c5, bishop to c7 was played, and now bishop to c4. Again, now not allowing the king to escape through g8, and again the threat of d5 is still here. So Morphy plays king to g7. We have c captures on b6, bishop captures on b6, and now rook to b2. Bishop to c7, and now rook to b7, pinning the bishop. So a very hard position for black to play, as this bishop pair Anderssen has is, well, extremely powerful. King to f6, we have bishop to b4, although d5 here was completely winning for white as well. But Anderssen decides to do it the other way. Bishop to b4, rook to g6, now bishop to f8, h5, king to f2, h4, g captures on h4, now rook to g4, h5, rook to h4, and now h6, the whole point of the bishop to f8 move, and now protecting this h6 pawn, and it's a very dangerous passed pawn. Rook captures on h2, king to g1, rook to h3, now attacking the e3 pawn, bishop to f1 with an attack on the rook, rook checks, king to f2, and well, why not capture the pawn? For example, if rook captures pawn on e3, what does Mr. Anderssen play? Well, h7, and there is no way to stop white from h8 queen. So after bishop to f1, rook to g3 check, king to f2, and now rook to g4. Now h7 isn't that deadly because the rook can go to h4. So bishop to c4, rook to h4, and now bishop to g8, preparing h7. Bishop to d6, offering an exchange of bishops, and Mr. Anderssen happily obliges. Bishop captures on d6, knight captures on d6, and now rook to d7 with an attack on the knight. Knight to e8, and now h7. A very, very dangerous pawn already. King to g5, Morphy has to find some counterplay. Rook to e7, knight to d6, rook to e6, again with an attack on the knight. Knight to c4, rook captures on c6, knight to d2, king e2 attacking the knight, and now rook to h2 with check. King d1, now knight to f3, rook to c7, king has to go to g6, Anderssen pushes d5, we have f4, e captures on f4, and now e3, Morphy is preparing to push e2. We have rook to e7, but now, of course, again, pawn to e2 with check. Rook captures, and now rook to h1. This was Morphy's idea, as now rook to e1 is impossible, and the king has to go to c2. So king c2, and now knight to d4, checking the king and also forking the rook. King d2, knight captures rook, king captures knight, and we have g7 by Morphy, preventing h8 queen, so Morphy's rook can now move. And okay, Morphy is up the exchange, but Anderssen has 3 pawns, and this is too much. King e3, we have rook e1 check, king d4, rook f1 attacking the pawn, king e5 defending, again rook e1 check, king f5, rook d1, now bishop to e6, rook d4, king e5 with tempo, rook d1, now f5, rook h1, f6 with check, king captures, this pawn well is happily sacrificed, king to d6, now rook to a1, king to e7, now rook to a7, one less check by Morphy, and now bishop to d7. And in this position, Mr. Morphy resigned the game, as there is no defense against f7 and f8 queen. This is just too much. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. And well, in the end, they played 11 games. The result was 7 wins for Morphy, 2 wins for Mr. Anderssen, and 2 of the games were drawn. So a very nice showing by Mr. Morphy, but Anderssen, well, thought that even if it's the end of the match, that he should give Morphy one more game like this. Even though it took 77 moves, he showed him the positional style of German mastery. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. This is all. These are all of the games I'm going to show from the match Morphy Anderssen of 1858. But I will put a link in the description below where you can check out all of the games if you would like. So yeah, that's it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.